Oh, there we go. You are coming on in. I had a few people message me saying they were going to hop in on a little bit later. So I just want to give people a chance to. It's tricky finding a time that works in the evening, but also works with time zones. So we're doing our best here. Okay. But we have a bunch of good stuff to cover here. So I'm going to go ahead and get the screen share going and we'll get started. So welcome everyone. I am so thrilled and excited to have you all here. This was a bit of an impromptu thing, but I felt like it's something that is very much needed right now. And hopefully you will be able to get out of it what needs to speak to you. There's going to be a variety of different perspectives and constructs. One thing I always like to make sure I say in the front is anytime I am sharing something, I am sharing constructs that are based off of patterns and are repeatable and applicable to us, but I'm never trying to speak for the church or declare doctrine or say anything like that. Everything that I share is coming from my experiences, my perspectives, and I offer them to others because they've been useful in my life and I've seen the impact that they've had on other people's lives, such as my clients and people that I work with. And so that is what I am here to do, is to share these ideas with you. And I hope that you will take some time to just kind of see what comes up to you, what connects with you, and what is meant to speak to you tonight. With that, we will go ahead and start. A little bit about me in case you are new. I know we've got a bunch of new people on Instagram, and maybe you're watching this as our first time connecting with each other. I am a wife to my high school sweetheart, mother to 3 adorable little boys, lover of all things chocolate, barefoot, rainy days. I did a lot of my education hodgepodge collection of things everywhere. So I started out at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where I studied as a dual major in biology and psychology. I did some work under MIT's Presencing Institute and their Theory U, where I studied a lot of leadership and systems. I have training as a life coach, as a professional organizer, and some other non-traditional methods like EFT tapping and timeline healing. So a little bit of all over the place, but it's come together to make some really beautiful magic, which we're going to be looking into more today. So I was born and raised in Utah. I was born or raised in the gospel. I grew up learning all the different things. And then I married my high school sweetheart at 19, which was never my plan. I was not going to be one of those Utah girls who gets married really young and has lots of kids. I had lots of plans and things I wanted to do in my 20s, and getting married young was not one of them. But that was the journey for me of God really saying, hey, you can go and do all those things, or you can come and start this new relationship and adventure. And I have so many more things in store for you. And that was really my very first
Truman, time for bed.
Divine departure that I did. And that experience took me through a myriad and range of emotions and relationships with the church. Had everything from being told that I was making a 180 and didn't know who I was anymore, and that I was listening to false spirits and all sorts of experiences on that journey. So I have been in the highs and in the lows. I have experienced the depths of postpartum depression and PTSD around the birth of my second child. Some of the highs and most wonderful experiences around the birth of my first and third. So just a lot of things happening, and each one of them playing a very specific role in my story and what led me to this moment. And a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you came from those experiences and patterns, and the things that I was able to learn from that shaped the messages that you're going to be hearing tonight. Today, though, I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. My goal and the people that I work with are on a wide spectrum. I'm never seeking to try and convert people or tell them what is right or wrong. My goal is always to help people connect with themselves and their own personal relationship with God, and trust that God can take care of the rest and knows what is best for you and your family, because I know that there is a variety of ways that we go through life and that God has certain things planned for us. And I never assume that I know what that path is going to look like for the people that I work with. But I'm grateful that for me, my path brought me back into activity in the church and feeling the connection after feeling a lot of dissonance and disorientation. Today, I like to describe myself as learning to love and live and give as my Savior. And as I connect and grow in my loving relationship with my heavenly parents and eternal earthly human family. Welcome, everyone. My signature line is, thanks for simply being you. So with that, here's kind of an overview of what we're going to be looking at today. Some of the questions and focuses for today is really looking at what is masculine and feminine language. Why does our society and culture have this overabundance of masculine language and focus? The importance of how to translate into the feminine and some practical applications. But before we can really dive into those, we really need to understand the background. Where did this language come from? How did it develop? What are those pieces of it? So we're going to be looking at the background, the focus, and the roles of masculine and feminine energies. Now, when I say masculine and feminine, I am not describing gender. I am not describing personality. When I talk about masculine and feminine energies, I am describing two different states of being. They are a group of traits. And you'll see here in a minute, I created this model that I call the staircase model. Some of you are probably somewhat familiar with it. I've talked about it a lot on my Instagram page, but it's basically a visual representation of the relationship between these two parties. And we all have masculine and feminine energies within us. Masculine energy is a lot more structured, organized, ordered. Feminine is a lot more creative and fluid, intuitive, flowing. Some synonymous words that I use with masculine and feminine are masculine is external, feminine is internal, masculine is tangible, whereas the feminine is intangible. The masculine is physical, the feminine is spiritual. So understanding those different words can help you understand kind of identifying which nature the concept or the language that you are hearing is coming from. So that's kind of a brief introduction to just masculine and feminine energy in general, so that we can dive in a little bit more into this background, the focus, and the roles. But before we do that, I do want to touch a little bit on what is a language and understanding the purpose of language, because that also plays a significant factor, right? Language is actually a construct. It is something we use as a way to try and communicate and express the thoughts and feelings that we are personally having. And like any construct, we all relate to them a little bit differently depending upon what our experience is with that. So certain words and certain phrases over time can come to have a certain connotation to us based upon how they were used. How did we first familiarize them? How did we come to understand that idea, right? In different languages like French, German, Spanish type of languages, there are sometimes words that different cultures have to describe things that other languages don't have a word for that experience, right? And that's because that culture finds that experience significant enough to want to put a word on that experience, right? But it can be hard to translate sometimes because it's a experience, right? It is something you have to feel, you have to experience it for yourself. And a lot of language we experience, but we don't always recognize that when we're using language, we are creating an experience and we are attempting to try and cultivate in others a similar experience to the one that we have had. And when we have that similar experience, it's easier for us to connect and understand with how the words are being used. But when our experiences start to shift and become different, then that language also needs to shift, because suddenly those words and phrases and meanings no longer connect the same with us. It no longer feels like it is describing the experience we are having. And when we look at this in the most basic form of masculine and feminine language, that internal connection would be the feminine piece, right? Because internal is feminine, and that external piece is the words and phrases that are being used. That is the masculine part of it. And so when our internal state shifts, which we're going to talk about a little bit here about why that happens and how that shifts and how that plays a role. But when that shifts, suddenly that external masculine language doesn't connect as well and doesn't feel like it is describing this internal experience. And this is what a lot of people go in search of. It's why books and poetry and things become very attractive, because there is new language in there that feels like it is representing or being able to communicate this new internal viewpoint or experience that is happening. But just because an internal shift has taken place doesn't mean that that old language has to become meaningless for us. We just have to find a way to take our new understanding, our new internal state of being, and reconnect it with the masculine. And that process is stepping away from the original masculine language into some new feminine language to understand the new experience that is being had, and then bringing that feminine experience back to the masculine as we reorder how we think about those original masculine words. And that's really a base pattern that shows up throughout this process. And we're going to describe it a little bit more here with the background. This is basically what my staircase model ultimately describes. Is you first have this weaving of the masculine, the reconnection with the feminine, and then the return back into relationship with the masculine, but it is from a new state. And you'll see here, if you are new to the staircase model, the gold part here represents masculine energy, where the blue is the feminine energy. And so that feminine is that internal state, where the masculine here is the external physical piece of it. For those of you who are a little bit more advanced in my work, this is 1/2 cycle. So this cycle actually repeats twice in order to complete a full cycle. And in that second half is where the masculine actually becomes the one to do this rise and shift. And that's where the external change happens. That's in the second half. We're not going to be diving into that as much today. We're just going to be focusing on this pattern right here, because this same pattern, the divine departure, the energy clash, the decision point, the rise or calibration, and the new stable point, that gets repeated again, but the roles reverse. So what is experienced here by the masculine, that is the feminine pattern. And so you can just kind of invert that a little bit. So we're going to dive in. It's very helpful, I found, to describe this staircase model in terms of a relationship between like a man and a woman. It fits with our classical stories of romance between a man and a woman. And so I'm going to do a quick overview of kind of what these 4 or 5 states are, and then we're going to switch to the story mode. So the divine departure is when the feminine is starting to shift out of the previous set point. So before the divine departure, we have this set point repeated over here. And the divine departure is basically this hole, this thing inside that says, I feel stuck, I feel trapped, I'm ready to move forward and enter into something new. The energy clash is as she starts to embrace more of that shift and that internal change occurring, it creates this new dynamic between the masculine and feminine as that energy is shifting. And this can often be a very difficult point to navigate. When you understand the energy clash and the power there, it gets really cool. The decision point is where we transition into this second half over here, which is made up of the rise or calibration period, which mirrors the energy clash in that there's this new dynamic that is going on and the energy is kind of split between the two. It hasn't balanced out yet before reaching a new stable point together. So keep kind of these terms and ideas in mind as we go through this narrative here. So the story begins and the masculine and feminine are balanced. They're living this life of pure joy together in this home they've created for themselves. Now you'll notice throughout the story, I'm going to be saying he and she and her and him. That's just referring to, again, the masculine and feminine energies. It's not necessarily implying gender here right now. So the feminine view of the divine departure is basically that one day the feminine finds she's no longer at home. She can feel trapped and stuck, like she's in a cage, and she tries everything she can to make the house feel like home again, but to no avail, until finally it's too much to bear, so she ventures out. She's departing. This journey takes her to unknown places, and she wanders through the night, at times questioning if she's made a terrible mistake, until she finds it. She arrives at a beautiful vista, a place beyond her dreams where she feels right at home. Meanwhile, the masculine is in mourning. Often he experiences this departure as a loss of his beloved. How could she do this to him? How could she leave? Why would she betray him so? Doesn't she understand that everything he has built was all for her? Without her, he is lost without purpose or vision. Any hope he has is simply in getting her to return. And that's really where his focus is. This then leads us to the energy clash. And from the masculine view, one day it happens, she returns, the masculine is thrilled and he runs to meet his beloved, longing to embrace her and return back into their life. But the feminine can't go back to the way things were. She is changed and this is no longer her home. She isn't here to stay. She is here for him. And all she wants is for him to come and join her in the beautiful vista she has found and there build a new life together. This news is often not taken well by the masculine. He doesn't want to leave. He doesn't understand. He sees no purpose in going. Nothing seems wrong with the home they have now. Why should he leave? If anything, he needs to convince her to stay, that she was wrong, deceived, that it's dangerous, dark, and known out there. How can he really trust her when the last time she left, he was so betrayed and so hurt? Which brings us to the rise points. There we go. Now comes this critical moment. Will she return back into the house, the one she no longer belongs in? Will she refuse and try to drag him to the vista? Or will she rise? Will she gently meet him where he is while maintaining what she knows in her heart to be true? Can she sit in the discomfort and the dissonance as she walks beside him, leading him to their new home? When we look at it from this perspective, it's very easy to understand why the masculine lens, we tell stories of wildernesses and mists of darkness and fear of the unknown. But when we start to introduce feminine language, especially risen feminine, we get this perspective that life is growth and abundance, and it's just waiting for us to explore and enjoy it. Part of the reason why we get stuck, though, in this masculine perspective has to do with the nature of masculine energy. Masculine energy and the way it cycles with feminine energy is the feminine intuition starts us out. There's some internal connection to the divine, and it inspires us. awakens a new desire. That intuition then is meant to turn into wisdom, which is directing where we need to go and how to move forward. And the masculine is meant to receive that wisdom from the feminine and put it into action, start making it happen. That action then from the masculine is meant to lead to direction. Direction is then all about pointing the feminine back to the intuition to seek out further inspiration on the next thing that they should do. And this is the balanced pattern of how they're meant to ebb and flow and work together. However, what often happens is the masculine, when he takes action from the feminine wisdom, goes, ha, success, we did this. This is so great. And let's just keep doing more and more of this. We figured it out, not realizing that you need the feminine balance there in order to keep things rolling and moving forward. So instead of this beautiful unfolding together, what often ends up happening is this vertical build where the masculine is trying to maintain what has happened and just keep repeating the same thing over and over, trying to get the same results. When in actuality, that starts to create this tension, right? And that over-structuring of the masculine steps away from the feminine. And that distance that is created is what triggers the feminine. That over-structuring of the masculine is why she's uncomfortable in the house and is like, I can't stay here anymore. I've got to fix this. We've got to do something differently. And that's what triggers kind of this whole journey and story here to take place. You can think about that over-structure of the masculine in a couple of different perspectives. One of them is we always need masculine energy to expand in order to be able to support the feminine growth. So we saw this take place in the collective in the form of a lot of revolutions, right? The American Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, the Technology Revolution, right? All of these things were this building up of the masculine, and it was all leading to being able for the feminine to come back in a new and expanded way, where we have greater connection and community and collaboration, which we see starting to take place in our world right now, right? So part of this over-structuring of the masculine occurs from that natural tendency to think I just need to repeat the same action over and over, which leads to that over-structured of masculine. Part of it comes from the natural phases of our world, and we've been in a very masculine one, and we're starting to shift into a feminine energy. So those are two places where that masculine viewpoint comes from, right? But the whole point is we don't want an extreme in masculine or feminine. We want to learn how to balance them together. And in order to understand how to balance them together, we need to first understand what is the focus of each of the different energies. The focus of the masculine is on shifting from phase 1 into phase 2 and phase 3. And these phases I'm going to explain in a minute. So just keep this pattern in mind though, and then we'll talk about what they are. The feminine focus is all about shifting from phase 2 into phases 3 and 4. So in phase 1, this is where we are very much in survival mode. There's no action, no real inspiration. We don't really have an established masculine or feminine energy yet. It's very fear-based. And in order to exit out of phase 1, you have to take action. Without action, you get stuck cycling in this phase 1. And if you stay cycling in phase 1 for a long period of time, that leads to despair and depression and hopelessness and disempowerment, right? Those type of feelings. And sometimes the only way that we have enough motivation or courage or desire to take action to move us from phase 1 to phase 2 is we kind of hit that rock bottom, and that kind of bounces us back up into finally feeling like we can do something, take some sort of action. When we do that, that brings us to phase 2. Phase 2 is what I call transition mode. It is all about action. And it is masculine in nature because action is a masculine energy trait. The focus here is on problems that need to be solved. The view is that there's this external change that needs to occur. That is the main focus in phase 2. And in order to exit phase 2 and enter phase 3, curiosity is one of the best emotions to help us do that. However, we can have a tendency to get stuck in taking action because what will happen is we realize that last time we took action, life got better. We felt better. Things were moving forward. We were progressing. And so then we want to keep taking action. But if we keep taking action, it's not going to move us into phase 3. In order to move into that phase 3, we have to shift to an internal experience. And that internal experience, one of the best ways is to start getting curious about what we're thinking, curious about what we're feeling, curious about what is going on inside of us. And if we're too caught up and focused in action, then we have a hard time doing that, which is where we see that this tendency of the masculine. One sec, I'm going to go take him to my husband and then I'll be right back. Sometimes he's fine to hang out with me. Other times he just wants to play and interact. So hopefully Dad can keep him entertained for a bit. But you can see here why we get that tendency of the masculine to take action and action and action and want to build things up, and where it can have that tendency to become over-structured, right? We get focused on this phase 2 experience because it solved our problems before. And part of the cycle that can occur here is you take that action, it feels good, you're exiting phase 1, you're entering into phase 2, you go to take action again and it doesn't work. And that can make us afraid of like, why isn't this working? What's going on? What's gone wrong? And if you experience fear in any of the stages, it will drop you back down into phase 1. And so this creates kind of this perpetual cycle of feeding the fear and taking action and kind of getting stuck in these 2 phases right there. So part of the role of the masculine is to help move us out of phase 1 and into phase 2. That is that action piece of it. But the second piece is that direction part of masculine leadership is what I call it. And it's really where we're now directing from that action problem solving to the internal, looking back to the intuition, pointing to the feminine, which brings us to phase 3. If we can accomplish that, we get into thriving mode. Phase 3 is all about inspiration, that internal introspection. It is feminine in nature. In this phase, we are looking at things as challenges instead of problems, or in phase 1, suffering. It can be the same external experience, but depending upon which phase we're in is how we are going to perceive and experience that circumstance. It changes depending upon what phase we're in. So phase 3 sees things as challenges and very much is focused on internal change. In phase 3, usually we get here because we kept trying to change the external and it didn't work and we gave up. So we're like, screw that. I'm going to focus on me and I'm just going to try and change myself. That's the only thing I can control. So I'm going to do this anyways, right? And that's where we get into this phase 3 is it's actually a beautiful thing, right? Because it takes us here where we start identifying with ourselves and beginning to understand that. And so phase 3, if we want to enter from phase 3 into phase 4, there are a few different emotions that can help us get into that phase 4 space. We want presence, satisfaction, and surrender. And this is where the kind of mind trip starts to happen because stage 4 can be hard to distinguish between phase 3. because they both start out with that inspired feminine piece. The difference is phase 4 is the balanced whole version. So it also has the masculine component of action here. And so it can be hard sometimes to differentiate between, am I in the phase 3 inspiration or am I in phase 4 inspiration? That's a little bit beyond our scope tonight, but that's just a thing to be aware of why we can struggle sometimes with making the jump from phase 3 to phase 4. Phase 4 is the most amazing, beautiful space to be in. To me, it is our goal. It is that description of Zion itself, one heart and one mind. The mind is often depicted as being masculine, the heart as being feminine. And we see that here mapped out in phase 4, where we have both the feminine and the masculine, the mind and the heart together. And the staircase model, if we look back at it, really depicts how the masculine and feminine come together, and they're just entwined with one another. They are one in this perpetual weaving of each other. They are distinct and separate. We're going to talk about the importance of that polarity in a minute, but they are still able to maintain that sense of unity. And that's a big piece for us to keep in mind when we're trying to wrap our minds around understanding concepts of oneness and wholeness and unity. That does not mean sameness. Sameness is what I call enmeshment. And I don't have a picture of my slideshow, so I will just show it to you here really quickly for reference, because this is an important concept. So I'm gonna stop the screen share real quick. Enmeshment is what happens after what I call a pimple. So if you can kind of see right here, there's this gray space, that is the rise. And if we aren't able to make the rise or maintain the rise, we experience what I call a pimple. And I call it that because this looks like a little pimple head showing up. And pimples can range from extremely painful to just annoying little blemishes, the same way real pimples would work. So I thought it was kind of a fun fitting name. But down here where you see the lines start to blur, that is where we start to experience enmeshment. And why this is dangerous and susceptible is we can easily think that this is what unity is, what oneness is, this period where we no longer have boundaries, we no longer have identities, we don't have a sense of self. This is something that easily happens in systems. We lose that individuality and get caught up in being a part of something where our identity is literally the system or the organization or the institution, which is something that a lot of people have experienced, particularly in the church. And if you find yourself having that experience, one of the first things you have to do is being described as self-differentiating, right? You have to create a new sense of self. You have to reestablish this boundary. It's coming out on this other side. And the interesting piece is this experience here mirrors the divine departure and starting out here again. So they're very similar in nature to each other. And this phase here, when you fail to rise and instead pimple, it's actually just another experience of the energy clash occurring, because this axis here along the bottom represents time. And time always goes forward, so we can't go backwards. So if we don't rise and we need to go back into the energy clash in order to get more clarity and understanding, that's really a big part of the energy clash, build up some of that momentum so that we can make the rise. That's what pimples are all about. Pimples are not necessarily an inherently bad thing. Sometimes we need them and they're necessary to help us progress and move forward. I'm going to pause for a minute here. Thoughts, questions, things that are coming up. I'd love to hear a little bit from you before we dive in any further.
Yeah, just a quick question.
Please.
Is it, I guess I'm curious if you have to be quite aware or like conscious of what's going on to be more in the like aligned phase, or if that kind of can happen without much consciousness or like awareness.
Oh, that is a wonderful question. So alignment, that phase 4 experience, is actually our innate divine nature. If you look at children, and especially infants, they are in that aligned state, and they do really good at something happens and it disrupts their world for a little bit, and they throw a fit and a tantrum. They feel all the feelings. They let you know they're having an experience, but then they can come right back, right? Within like 5 seconds, they jump from like the world is in shatters and terror and whatever. And then they're like, hey, I found a purple dinosaur. Let's go play, right? They're totally fine. They have that ability to spring back. And that's because their set point is anchored in that aligned space. All of us have that same set point when we are born. We experience human trauma, and not having good self-regulation and failure to understand some of these concepts starts shifting our set point. And a lot of us end up moving all the way that by the time we're in adulthood, our set point is actually in phase 1, in that survival mode, fear-based thing. And that's where we're living the majority of our lives as adults until we kind of hit that rock bottom and we start to move and shift backwards. So absolutely, yes, you can totally be in phase 4 without being consciously aware of it. If you are naturally not introducing any resistance or overthinking things or getting caught up in stuff, you're going to be there. One of my favorite descriptions of it that I learned from one of my teachers is it's like a cork floating in water. It's automatically going to float to the top as long as there's nothing holding it down. And it's a lot of those wounded beliefs and experiences and trauma that are like weights and things on top of our cork that are holding it down under the water. And that's that pressure that we can feel building, kind of like if you're trying to hold a beach ball under the water and there's that tension that builds up until finally we're like, ugh, I can't. That sense of relief is actually letting go of a lot of that resistance and popping back up to our divine nature. And to me is another reason why Christ says, become like a little child, because they're anchored in that aligned center point that we all want to get back to. And to me, in the millennium, we'll know how to navigate this well enough, we'll know how to raise children well enough that we won't be shifting people's set points as they're growing up and as they're shifting. We will have done a lot of our generational healing and done a lot of trauma work and stuff so that we can keep that and maintain it. And parents are in this aligned space and they're raising their children from this aligned space, and everybody gets to learn how to operate from this greater aligned place and experience. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. That was a great question. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay. So let's keep going then. Here we go. So this is actually kind of a description of what I was just describing, that this is part of my pendulum.
Wait, Emily.
Oh, yeah.
Can you go back one more? I didn't write down all the phase 4 stuff.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you.
No problem. We can hang out here for a second. Something I will note as well is you can go through these different phases in lots of different areas of your life and in lots of different time frames, right? So I have experienced moving through all 4 phases in the span of like 10 seconds. I've experienced it taking several minutes and hours. Sometimes it takes months and years. Sometimes it's taken a decade to move through those. So it's not like it's a one-time thing, but most of us, you can think of it as we have this set point and we kind of fluctuate around that place, and we can rise and fall and access all the different phases, but we tend to be drawn back to a certain phase. And the goal is that over time, we're learning how to shift our set points back into that stage 4 experience.
Okay, so we can go down in the phases.
Yes, you can. One of the fastest ways to move downward is negative emotion, because the reason we experience negative emotion is it's actually letting us know the masculine and feminine are out of balance. and they're not in their proper place. And every time we start to feel better or we feel relief, it's because we're bringing those back into greater alignment with each other. So you can, like if you look at phase 2, one of the actual common doorways into phase 2, no matter which phase you're in, is anger or anxiety. That's a typical way we access that one. And that's because we have this external gripe, right? And we're either angry about it or we're anxious about it, right? And if we're feeling one of those emotions, that can drop us back into the, I have a problem, I need to fix this problem. And part of this is learning how to regulate your nervous system and your thoughts so that you can navigate which phase do I want to be operating in, instead of letting your external environment and what people say and what is going on in the world and the number in your bank account and the number of followers on your account or what your bishop says or doesn't say, right? Those things are what we tend to let program us into how are we going to respond? What phase are we going to operate from? We have the ability to use our agency, though, to program our thoughts, to program our biology and our nervous system to get used to which phase do we want to be operating out of. Okay. Other thoughts or questions here? Okay. If you guys are using the raising your hand thing, let me know, like feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me because I can't always see all of your screens. So if I'm missing your hand raising, just speak up. If you have a question, somebody else probably does too. Okay. So this is another version of looking at the masculine when it is by itself and when the feminine energy is by itself, and then when they are operating together. So we can kind of have our experiences where we're ranging back and forth between these different experiences. And usually what tends to happen in the church is part of its purpose is to, right now, how it was organized, right, is to help people who have been living in a phase 1 experience get to a phase 2 one. So that's a big reason why a lot of our language is focused around action and doing things and some of this masculine language. There was another good one. Oh, self-reliance, right? That is all really important things to be talking about if who you are addressing are people who are in phase 1 and you're trying to get them into phase 2. We also have in our doctrine and some of our language, pointing us into that phase 3 when we talk about personal revelation and developing a relationship with your heavenly parents, right? That's the masculine attempting to kind of push us into the next phase, into the feminine. But right now, the church's center point or set point is really in a phase 2 area. That's why it's very heavy in masculine language and masculine description. And in order for us to fully move through this staircase model, the masculine needs to shift its set point. But in order for that to happen, the feminine, which is the membership, has to start exploring that phase 3 and moving more and more into the phase 3 and phase 4 states. And as we do that, that will naturally allow the set point of the masculine to start to rise and create more support and systems and policies and programs and things that are operating from that phase 3 and phase 4 experience. One of the examples that we have of this shift already starting to take place was when President Nelson announced the change from being church-centered, family-supported to family-centered, church-supported, right? That is that shift to we're moving into a phase 3 state where you as a family unit and individuals and the membership are now centrally in charge of things, and the church is coming along to help support that experience. So that's kind of a fun way to be looking at these 4 different phases and recognizing why so much of this masculine language is prevalent. It's because we're anchored in that phase 2 phase. And right now, why I believe God is calling so many people, and especially women who tend to lead or be dominant in feminine energy, on a divine departure is because we need people starting to explore and create the phase 3 language. We need that feminine language of how to describe these experiences and processes and doctrine, really, like putting new language to this understanding. It's not about changing the doctrine. It's not about saying the doctrine was wrong or the gospel is incorrect or that, you know, something is missing. To me, Christ was operating from a phase 4 state of being, right? He embodied both the masculine and the feminine, and he taught and implemented both the masculine and the feminine, right? The feminine came out when he would talk to the Pharisees and Sadducees, who were in a phase 2 base as well, right? Very much on actions, and these are the things you need to do, and very much in a masculine world. And he was trying to introduce them to the feminine, phases 3 and 4, and telling them, you know, it's not just about doing these very specific things, right? There is this internal component that matters, right? Don't get caught up in all of the action, because if you get over focused on the action, you're going to be stuck cycling here, and it's going to prevent your ability to progress and move forward. But at the same time, he organized a structure. He had 12 apostles, and he established different patterns and ways of collecting groups and teaching, and how do we continue passing authority. And a lot of that masculine structure was later restored through Joseph Smith. Here is the original scaffolding, if you will, that Christ established, the masculine side of things, that was meant to support people's internal personal connection to God. And Joseph Smith was all about reestablishing that in the modern day so that we could have that masculine support for this feminine internal place. And it's actually a hallmark of how well that has worked and how much it has helped that we have a lot of people who are struggling in the church right now, because that means it's done its job. It successfully moved a lot of the membership from a phase 1 and 2 standpoint into a phase 2 and phase 3 standpoint. And that's where this feeling of I'm not connecting with church anymore, the language doesn't speak to me, it feels kind of dead. I used to get so much out of it, and it was like my safe space, and I loved being there, right? That's the feminine loving, enjoying being in that home that was created for her by the masculine. And her starting to no longer feel at home there is indicative of growth and progression, and saying you are ready for more, right? And that parallels and matches with a lot of the language that President Nelson has been using in several years. You know, this is part of the ongoing restoration. Get ready, take your vitamins, right? There's a lot more where that came from. He's letting us know that the jump from phase 2 to phase 3 is not the end goal, that there's more in store, that things are going to need to continue shifting, that the organization is going to need to shift in its masculine structure. He's already exemplified that with changing of some of the processes in the temple, shifting to the Come Follow Me curriculum, as well as shifting to 2-hour church, right? Those are all examples of the masculine organization of the institution shifting from this phase 2 space into more of a phase 3 one. We are trying to focus more of our teaching on that internal piece and helping people get introspective, and how can you foster discussions and, not just regurgitate information to them, right? How do we start having these, even that rule that came out for a little while of like our classes need to be set in a circle instead of a teacher up front and a body of students essentially gaining the information. That was a shift from a masculine structure to a feminine one, right? And it was very uncomfortable for a lot of people. For a lot of people, it was hard to move into that phase 3 space. It requires, in order to make the jump from phase 2 to phase 3, there is a very unique and specific barrier, so to speak, that you have to cross. And it is extreme levels of vulnerability, transparency, authenticity, responsibility. When we are in phases 1 and phase 2, more of the momentum is in this denser state. When we get into phase 3 and phase 4, it is more in a lighter state. And so if you're bouncing between 3 and 4, it can be easy to just kind of stay there. Once you cross over to phase 2, now you've got more of this downward momentum occurring, and it becomes a lot easier to get into phase 1. And so sometimes when I'm teaching my students, I'll say, you've got too much downward momentum. You're on like the lower side of phase 2. Just hit rock bottom and start over. Because when you hit rock bottom, you bounce back to that natural set point of phase 4. If you've been working through this process and you know how to self-regulate through that. But that's sometimes a faster way than the amount of effort required to cross that barrier from phase 2 to phase 3. That can be a really challenging one for people to make. And it's important to note that this process isn't one that takes place just mentally. It also takes place emotionally, but especially biologically. And we don't always talk about that. But this is why people who have experiences where they've been cycling in phase 1 and 2 for a long time, it becomes exhausting and hard to stay in that space. And they literally biologically feel like they can't keep going it, and that their only choice is to exit the organization, to remove themselves from the situation that they feel is keeping them stuck in these 2 phases. And so understanding and respecting people's biology and how that plays a role in their responses and what they feel comfortable with, that when we experience a new idea that we're not quite sure about, our body kind of half goes into alert stage, because it's like, we're not quite sure about this. What reference do we have for this? We haven't been programmed what to think or feel about this yet. Is this safe? Is this not safe? I'm not sure. I don't know what's going on, right? And if we don't honor and respect that people are kind of in that, what's going on phase, they can quickly flare up into, okay, this is unknown. This is not safe. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to talk about it. La, 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 la. Right? That's where we can get into this clashing that is not a healthy form of clash. It is actually a biological response. Learning how to help people be in a receptive biologic state of being is actually a really powerful form of communication. It is not about showing weakness or submitting to, okay, fine, I just will put my thoughts and my opinions aside. It's about helping somebody feel safe and that they can trust you enough so that they can relax and have their body be in a biologically receptive state. So that then when you enter and engage in the conversation, you can actually hear each other and talk to each other, and you don't have your biological wall coming up and getting in the way. So that's kind of some of the challenges and struggles that we see occurring right now, and kind of this extreme version of the energy clash is it's a lot of biology that's interacting with each other. You have a lot of triggered people who are making a lot of other people feel uncomfortable, and their uncomfort is triggering a lot of more people, and nobody is really knowing how to communicate or how to understand one another or how to create actual solutions, because nobody's in a biological state to actually have a productive, receptive conversation. You can only do that once you feel in a space where you are safe and trusted. And that's why relationship is a really key piece of this, because ideally the whole purpose and goal of relationship is that you learn to believe in that other person or party, and you learn to trust that it's safe for you to express and be there and be yourself. And so sometimes a lot of my work that I'm doing as a coach is just providing these spaces for people to come into where they can be safe and relaxed and feel trusted and protected and available to kind of start being vulnerable and opening up and crossing that barrier from phase 2 to phase 3 and learning how to get into phase 4. And once you have experienced somebody holding that space and allowing you to be very real and raw, without judgment, without telling you what's right or wrong, but just letting you to exist as you are and to express love and compassion while simultaneously having an ability to say, I see the goodness in you. I see the potential. I see where you can go forward. That's one of the most loving, powerful, and empowering relationships we can have. And part of my whole goal and purpose is how to teach people how to have these types of relationships, because the more of those types of relationships we have, the more of us are able to cross that phase 2, phase 3 barrier and start spending more and more of our time in these phase 3, phase 4 experiences, which just helps perpetuate our progression towards the millennium and building Zion, right? So that's a part of some of that language and why it's important. So another way to think about it is viewing it in this pendulum experience. And phase 1 is kind of at these extremes. Phases 2 and phase 3 bring us closer and closer in. And so we're kind of moving through the different phases at different times. And you'll notice if you move all the way out to phase 1, you have to move into phase 2 before you can get back to phase 4, or you have to move into phase 3 and then phase 4. There's not a lot of jumping. The one exception is if you crash all the way down to phase 1 and you don't add on any resistance, you can pop back to phase 4. But usually that is experienced as a quick little 2, 3, 4. It's so fast you don't always recognize that that's occurring, and it feels very spontaneous and natural. But that's another way that you can kind of think about that. And in the pendulum, I describe the masculine by itself as the imposter self, because the imposter self on the outside appears like it's doing all of the right things, right? You may take the exact same actions and do the exact same things here as you would do here. But the difference is when you're doing them from this state, you have that internal personal desire. You're not doing it simply because of an imposed external one, which is that overstructuring of the masculine here, right? There's too much order. There doesn't feel like there's enough flexibility, freedom, ability to be yourself. And a lot of people will hang out over here and hold and hold and hold that experience, thinking, here's my pendulum and I need to be this. They think this is the goal. And that endure to the end means I need to hold the pendulum swing here as long as I possibly can and for all of my life if I can, until more and more of us are trying that and being like, I can't do that. That is way too hard. And we drop. And the pendulum starts to shift. And often all of that momentum now has to go somewhere, and it shifts over to this feminine side, the rebel self, right? This is where the feminine is now going out and exploring what new areas are available, right? And starting to reconnect with the feminine, identifying it, recognizing, being like, oh, hey, I can be myself. It is okay to trust myself. I have value. I have worth. It is not all dependent upon this masculine external piece. And as you experience more time here in the feminine, a lot of people get afraid that what's going to happen is the same way somebody was over here trying to hold it, that on the opposite side, they're going to be here and try and hold this newfound feminine perspective. What is happening a lot in our world right now is not that. We're learning how to do more of that swing, and we're actually lessening the amount of time that we're spending in those extreme imbalanced experiences, so that we're starting from smaller spaces and being like, ooh, this doesn't feel comfortable. I can't even go up to here, and I can't hold this for 50, 60 years. Like by the time I hit here, I'm like, ugh, that's uncomfortable. And so we're able to move over here a little bit, and then it's easier to find that natural place. This phase is not as hard to find and maintain. And so we may initially have a bit of a that's occurring, but eventually it can start settling here if we understand that process, if we have support around us that is helping us feel safe and trusted. When you don't have that safe space to move through and to process all of these things, you end up bouncing more to the extremes and having more of this extreme experience, and it essentially you end up re-traumatizing yourself over and over and over, so that anytime you try to go into these higher phases, your body doesn't view it as safe, and it's going to keep trying to rebound you back into that phase 1 state getting you on high alert. And so you're constantly just kind of doing these extreme things. That's why healing is so important. That's why community and support is so important, because it allows you that opportunity to not just mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, but also biologically help find that center somewhere. Okay. So before we do we're going to dive in next into some specific language examples. But before I do that, I want to see if there's any thoughts or questions here. Okay, cool. So a few examples here, and you can kind of keep this masculine by itself, feminine by itself, and bringing them together for a more balanced experience. That's what we're going to be looking for when you are trying to translate. You're basically trying to identify, okay, what is the masculine action, external doing version of this thing? What is the feminine, internal, personal, more of a focus on just you and God perspective, that feminine one. And if you can identify those two pieces, they come together to create something new. It's not just 1 + 1 is 2. It is an emergence property. It is 1 + 1 is 5, right? It expands even beyond that into the aligned version. And that's why we want the aligned experience, because it's not just a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And we're trying to find what is the truth in this and what is the truth in that, and sort of mesh them together to create some order together, right? That's what we tend to think of a compromise is. That's not actually a true compromise. A true compromise is recognizing this whole thing and this whole thing. And we want to bring the wholeness of ourselves and create a whole new thing that is different from those two pieces. And that idea of we're creating something new and not just trying to rewrite the two in order to fit together, that's one of the key pieces of understanding kind of this translation process. And that the goal isn't just to make the flip from masculine to feminine, though that's often a first step, right? That's what we just talked about, is sometimes when you've spent all this time in just the masculine, you need to go discover some feminine language. This is often why people love to explore other religions and things not related to our religion at all, right? Mythology and fairy tales and that type of thing, to get in touch with the feminine, because we just want something that is that different language to identify and try and describe this new experience. But once you become really good at understanding the feminine, connecting with it, recognizing it, there starts to develop this longing and realizing you need some masculine back in, right? It's like living in a really, really tight budget for a long time. And then you finally get like a little bit of breathing room. And so there's this tendency to want to just like go spend it all, but then realizing like, okay, that's not a sustainable way to manage my finances. I need some sort of system or structure or budget in place to help me manage how I'm using my money, right? But there's that fear as we start coming back that we're not going to find that aligned space, that the only option is to go back to the masculine as it was before, especially because the masculine in the aligned self often looks and sounds the same as the imposter self. Right. I shared a post on my Instagram the other day where I was talking about my experience with my covenants and my garments and the temple endowments, right? And a lot of the language that I was using was back to some of this masculine language. And it was interesting, the first time that I started describing some of those things, there was still a piece of me that was like, you're using the old language. Are you sure about this? Right? Like, that's my body being like, remember the last time you were over in this masculine world and it was very stifling and structured? Like, are you falling back into that? But because I'd had enough of this feminine experience on the other side, I had enough of this internal personal connection, a relationship with myself, a relationship with my body and my thoughts and my ability to choose and make decisions and all of that, feminine freedom, I knew how to balance and bring the two together. And so it can often appear like nothing has changed between the imposter self and the aligned self. But there is very much a difference there. And usually the key to being able to distinguish the difference is you have to have gone on the journey and explored the feminine before coming back to the aligned space. So kind of keep all of that in mind as we're going through a few of these examples. So down here in the bottom, you'll see whatever the word is that we're going to be focusing on. We'll have the masculine alone version, the feminine alone version. So these are two kind of imbalanced versions, and then the aligned version of that. So the masculine version of worthiness is very much stay in line, follow the rules. If you do X, Y, Z, you have earned your worthiness, right? The feminine takes the flip side of that, right? And it's trying to get rid of a lot of that structure and the rules and the order there, and says, wait a second, I don't need to prove my worth in order to be loved. I can do anything and still have this deep connection with God, right? And when you are shifting from the imposter self masculine version to the feminine version, it feels very much like the masculine is wrong and the feminine is right. And we need to let go of the masculine and shift to this feminine perspective, which, as we were talking, the goal is actually to come to this aligned perspective. And the aligned perspective is kind of what I talked about in my Instagram around, is God's love conditional, right? Absolutely, our worth is ingrained. There's nothing we can do to change it, to make it any less or make it any more. That's another key piece of it. Sometimes because we think we can increase our worth by doing things, that we can thereby decrease it by not doing those things. Our worth does not shift. So what is shifting then, right? What is that key piece that the masculine is identifying and trying to talk about? What the masculine in the incomplete version is usually touching on is a key part of the relationship piece. And so when you're trying to translate the masculine into an aligned version with the feminine, a key piece of that is going to be, okay, what is the relationship part of this? And the relationship part of this is the same way I set boundaries with my kids, like my 2-year-old who wants to climb all over me and pull my hair while I'm nursing. And I say, look, I love you so much. And you can climb all over me and pull my hair and I will still love you exactly the same. However, there are some rules about being in relationship with me. And this is so interesting. You'll notice sometimes as I'm talking, there may be different words that trigger you and you're like, I don't like that word. I don't like that hesitancy, or it creates a hesitancy in you. There's a little bit of me that still has resistance around rules, right? And feeling like, rules, I don't like rules, right? That has to do with some of that experience I had in over masculine spaces. Even school was like a big one. And that idea that there are these limitations that I have to stay in, but it's not about limitations, right? A boundary is different from what we tend to think of as a rule, right? Going back to my 2-year-old example, I will say, I would love to be with you. I want to connect with you. I want to have you close to me. But in order for me to get the most out of this experience and not be like stressed and anxious and frustrated and like fighting you off the whole time, and so now I'm not really fun to be around and I'm becoming an angry, irritable, anxious mom, here's the boundary. You need to sit next to me, not climb on top of me, not pull my hair. And what that does is it creates space and opens up this ability for us to actually have more freedom of the feminine, because there's some order in place. There's some structure there. One of the analogies I like to use is it's kind of like thinking of the amount of structure that exists between a tent and a house, right? The tent has a lot less structure there. You remove some of it and it can very quickly just collapse, and there's not a lot of space in there. In a house, especially imagining, like a great big ballroom, there's usually a lot of like pillars around the side, and that structure is what creates the ability to hold up and build all of that space, right? So usually the masculine piece is trying to point us to some type of boundary in relationship that is actually going to give us the ability to deepen our relationship, draw us closer to God, get into this deeper state of existence, and expand that feminine truth to new levels, right? Because we can experience that feminine truth on its own without the masculine, without being in the aligned space. But it's a smaller version than what becomes available when we have that masculine structure in place to open up more to us. So our perspective on God, when we are no longer in a phase one survival mode, right? Phase one survival mode is everything out there is out to get me, right? God is there to punish you, right? Phase one is very much the Old Testament, right? That fear of God, right? And Christ starts introducing this different God, right? Who has this feminine piece to it, this I will love you unconditionally bit, right? And the ultimate goal is that we want to shift into a relationship where God says, I love you and I will always love you no matter what, but I want to be in relationship with you, not just love you. And the depths of my relationship, I've established some ways for you to deepen those and to really make them personal. But a lot of times those ways, which are our ordinances and our covenants and a lot of that masculine structure in the church, because we experience those first, usually on their own, without having that feminine internal piece, we have a lot of wounding around that tends to need to get worked through first before we're ever in a relaxed enough mode to be able to receive that experience and experience what that looks like, right? And that's why it's so important to understand the different phases. What phase are you in? How is that contributing to your experience with different things in the church? What do you need to heal? What do you need to bring back into that greater experience of alignment so that then you can re-step into these experiences from a healed whole state and experience greater depth of relationship, right? Now, I stated at the very beginning, my goal is never to try and tell somebody like, you have to do all of this and heal it, and then it will bring you back into this relationship with God, and it's going to be wonderful and better than anything else. In fact, we're going to be talking a little bit more about that towards the end here in a minute, but the important piece of that is God is never going to force any relationship on us, and that relationship requires an amount of interaction and communication. Without that regular engagement, the relationship just kind of falls apart, right? If you think about your relationship with your spouse, with your kids, with your roommates, with your friends, right? You have to have, it's more about the frequency in which you interact with one another that actually builds that momentum to keep the relationship feeling alive and connected. And when you stop doing it so regularly or consistently, you're not talking as much or you're not doing things together, that's when the relationship starts to kind of settle and lose some of that momentum. And it's that same idea in our relationship with God. And so this is, well, actually, I'm going to leave it there. We'll touch on that more in a second when we dive into some things towards the end. But thoughts, questions here before we move on to the next word. Okay. So the next one we're going to look at is sin. And from the masculine perspective, sin is when we fail to do what we're told by God or the prophets, right? And feminine perspective on sin is more of this personal relationship to God, and it's between you and God knows your heart, and that's what matters most. It's not as important, you know, if you're following these specific guidelines or not. When we look at it from an aligned perspective, sin is anytime we are out of alignment with God or with ourselves. And that key piece is with ourselves. We don't ever really talk about this, but one of the true fundamentals of relationship is you can only be in relationship with somebody to the degree that you have that relationship with yourself, right? It's often said you can only love somebody as much as you love yourself. And so when we're focusing too much on building this relationship with God and we haven't built this relationship with ourselves, that's when we're kind of getting the order out of whack a little bit and we're focusing a lot on this external space. We're losing ourselves. And that's what a lot of people it can be a triggering point for them, is feeling like, I don't even know myself anymore, right? That happens in the enmeshment occurring, right? Because now we don't have that sense of self. And so looking at sin as anytime we're out of alignment with God or ourselves helps us recognize that basically something is off in the relationship, and that there are two parts of that where we can be off in the relationship. And so, sometimes we may sin by, looking at pornography. Well, maybe that has to do about our relationship with God, but it probably has more to do about our relationship with ourselves, and that something is off in our relationship with ourselves. And so it's not so much that God is saying like, this is a horrible, bad thing that you should be doing. It's God saying, hey, this is not the best way for you to have a relationship with yourself. There's a better form of relationship you can have with yourself. And if you can heal that, then the experience of the relationship you can have with me and with other people becomes magnified. You can take just about anything that we label as sin as a shift or misalignment in relationship. And usually the fundamental piece of it is actually we're out of alignment with ourselves when we are engaging in that, right? So if we're lying to somebody, we're not showing up authentically and true to ourselves. We are using a false version of us, right? That might be even a fun exercise, is to go through like the 10 different commandments, and can you identify what is out of alignment in your relationship with yourself, and therefore how that affects your relationship with God, and that's why it's a sin or bad or wrong. It's not because God has this big list of rules that we need to memorize and we need to learn. It's because we need to experience what it is like to be in alignment. Alignment is not something you can actually know from just your mind or hearing about it or talking about it. You have to experience it. That is how we come to know what it is. And so different programs and tools and guidelines and commandments that God gives us are basically ways for us to help find experiences of alignment. So we know what that looks like, so that we can try and seek it out more and have that be the main focus of our relationship, so that the experience we can have together with God deepens. Right? So we've got to bring the fullness of who we are into the relationship, and having prophets or apostles or leaders teach us things or tell us things that we're to do is basically God saying on a collective level, hey, I'm looking down, I'm seeing these are all the different ways that you're out of alignment in your relationship with yourself, and it's affecting your relationship with me and other people. So here's some things that you can do to help foster that relationship with yourself and with other people. And that's why there's a beautiful piece in personal revelation, right? Because personal revelation is our own way to access God and figure out our alignment. But sometimes we're in such a misaligned state, or we have never experienced enough of what it is like to be in alignment, that we're not really sure how to find that. And that's where having this direction and these guidelines and these things you can do, like for example, the social media fast that President Nelson encouraged a while back, right? That was, hey, you're starting to lose yourself. You're not having this connection. Here's a tangible, practical thing you can do that can help you reestablish, oh yeah, this is what it feels like to be in alignment with myself. And I want to make sure that this is what I'm experiencing anytime I'm choosing to engage in social media, right? It's helping us in that external place when we're struggling to find those places ourselves. But our personal revelation is also important because it lets us know which tools we need when. Because if we just approach it from the masculine perspective of, here's the big list of all the things I have to do because they were all put in general conference, right? That's also going to take us out of alignment, because we're not doing it from that feminine internal connection of what do I need? We're not looking at it and going, okay, I was just handed what? 2, 4, 6, 8 to 10 hours worth of tools, right? What of all of that content that I just received is giving me guidance and direction for what I need right now. And sometimes we have had so much trauma and experience going on that we can't even look at those tools to find the guidance, because all of that language, right, it doesn't point us back to our internal connection. There's too much resistance. There's too much trauma there that has built up. And so we need to seek out some other language, some other experiences, and calm things back down before we can re-engage in it. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is kind of understanding those degrees of trauma and how it affects our ability to process and deal with different types of language. But this personal connection with yourself is a really important thing to keep in mind with any principle of the gospel or thing that we're studying or lesson that we're teaching, right? Can you rewrite it in terms of how does this bring me into greater relationship with myself? And then how can I take the wholeness of me and enter into relationship with God, right? That's our pattern. That's our goal. So that's questions on this one before we move to the next one.
No, it just makes so much sense.
Right?
Like, okay. Like the young women lesson in 2 weeks, I think, is like keeping the commandments or something. So I'm like, okay, how can I teach these girls more of this kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a perfect example, right? Yeah. And again, part of that, sometimes the masculine gets caught up in its role, right? My role, masculine energy is very much, I have this duty, I have this job, I have this purpose. It is my entire existence is around fulfilling my job, right? When we look back to our story between the man and the woman, he exists for the very purpose of building a house for her to live in. If she's not there, there's no purpose to this house that he's creating. And his whole identity is wrapped up in that role. And so sometimes when we're in that very masculine energy based space, especially when it is men who lead with masculine energy naturally, they tend to be coming at it from that space of like, I got to give you the things and I got to tell you the stuff and I got to make sure that you're doing it because this is my job and I'm going to do my job well. The same way women have that almost innate thing in them that is like pushing them to go out and explore and seek new and explore these new ideas and this new world and what's possible and where can we go and what are these ideas and like we love having the conversations and all of this wonderful stuff, right? That's in our nature, right? Because the feminine role, and again, this is what energy do you lead with, not necessarily gender, but what is that energy that you're tapping into that you're wanting expressed there, right? And if we can understand, oh, that's what the masculine's doing. He's not trying to cage me. He's not trying to trap me in here. Maybe he hasn't learned yet how to follow that intrinsic instinct in a way that is more supportive and less damaging and less traumatizing to me, right? That's part of the growth there. Same way as it is for us to learn, how can I explore and expand and do all these things and not overwhelm the masculine when I come back with them? How can I break it down into bite-sized pieces that he's ready for so that I can gently lead him from our old house to the new beautiful vista and our new home there, right? So it's that balance again of recognizing kind of that instinctual piece. Okay. So our next piece is repentance. So you can't talk about sin without talking about repentance. So the masculine version of this is you must do all of these steps in order and then you're done, right? That's kind of how we think about it, sort of how the 12-step program is set up. We kind of view it as just complete these things and then you're good. And that can feel kind of strange too if you have a bishop who doesn't tell you all the steps you have to do, or if you're sitting there going like, I'm just doing all the steps because I'm told I have to do them and I don't really understand why this is important or why this matters, right? That's getting back into that feminine piece where it's like, as long as your heart is changed, you're sorry, that is enough, right? Those are kind of, when I write these two, they're kind of written in more extreme versions, right? To kind of paint the polarity between them. But when we talk about the aligned version, it's that the goal really is all about, again, the relationship and bringing us back into relationship with ourselves, with others, and with God. And so when we sin, we shifted that relationship and it got out of whack and it created this sort of tension. And because anytime we are in relationship with other people, we are connected, it makes this tension between us that occurs. So if we are falling out of alignment with ourselves, it's going to affect our relationship with others. And restitution is basically saying, hey, I recognize that my choices and my actions affected our relationship and shifted things and made it harder for you to stay in this place of alignment. And so I want to bring myself back into alignment so that it's easier for you to be in alignment. And really, an apology or saying sorry is all about reestablishing trust and saying, I know I did something that brought us out of alignment and that made you go, ooh, I don't know if this is safe. I don't know if I can be here. I'm not quite sure about this relationship and what I want to be in. Repentance is really about, again, bringing ourselves back into alignment, reestablishing that trust, right? That's what restitution is really about, is how can I help create trust between us again? Because anytime we go out of alignment with ourselves, we are going out of alignment with God, we are going out of alignment with the other people we are in relationship to. And those are basically tools to help us shift back into an aligned state, right? It's not just you have to do all these things to pay your penance because you were a horrible person and did a horrible thing, right? That's how we often kind of think about it. But it really is, again, it's all in the relationship perspective. If you learn to start looking at things through this relationship perspective, and is my relationship out of alignment or in alignment, a lot of these things start to just naturally make sense and navigate. How do I find the balance between these two different perspectives and views? So those are the three that we're going to go over tonight. I have created a resource sheet for you that will be sent out with the replay, and it goes over more topics that are covered there. And I am getting ready to prepare some sort of thing where I dive through and explore a general conference talk. It'll probably be like a monthly video that I'll put out for free of just walking you through, here's all the different points, here's the different language that was used, here how you can see the masculine, you can see the feminine, you can understand the relationship, and just kind of walking you through it on a bigger level so that you can start having exposure and practice about how do I think about these things, how do I start making these shifts, how do I start applying them. So that's things to look forward to if you're like, that's helpful, but you only covered 3. How do I keep going? Those are the tools and resources that are coming your way. But before we continue with that, I want to make sure we touch on the importance of the roles of masculine and feminine energy real quick as we're wrapping up, because this is a really important piece in order to understand, to avoid enmeshment. And it'll help you identify 2 different experiences that people are having and why. But first, from an energetic perspective, which for those of you who are new, when I talk about energetics, the main idea that I'm trying to describe is that there are these intangible parts of us and our experience that it's hard to quantify and accurately describe how they play a role in our experiences. And energetics creates a language and a construct and a thought pattern in which we can start to recognize how that intangible part of our world and our existence plays a role in our regular lives. So from an energetics perspective, there's very much a need for different roles because it creates polarity. Now, I know when I talk about roles, we talk about masculine and feminine, some of you are sitting here going, gender roles, right? We're not talking about gender roles, right? Gender roles is an attempt to understand this principle that I feel like is incomplete because it's not recognizing what does it look like to be a whole person. And a fundamental part of that is that we all have masculine and feminine energies within us, and that we need to learn how to balance and tap into both of those energies when we need to. Gender roles was kind of helping us get clear on what are these 2 energies, what do they look like, so that then we could create the rhythm and the nuance between them without creating enmeshment and blending and losing that polarity. So it served an important purpose in our collective history, but we have sort of grown past it, and we see this happening more and more with women entering the workforce more, and men helping out with the childcare and raising of children more, and shifting in partnership parenting, right? All of that is kind of getting into this polarity rhythmic dance between the 2 different energies. But it's important that we recognize that polarity is key. Without that polarity, that's where we start to get the enmeshment, and that inevitably leads to a loss of self, which is the antithesis of what we want. Everything we want is in terms of bringing the wholeness of ourselves into relationship with the wholeness of other people's selves, right? And when we have that polarity, again, from this energetic perspective, that's what creates this momentum that allows us to keep moving forward. And it becomes like this spontaneous system that just propels itself forward. What we tend to want is that polarity creates a lot of this tension and discomfort, and we tend to think something is wrong because we no longer agree and things were really good when we were back in the stable point, but now we've gone on this divine departure and now we're entering the energy clash, and it's like, all this tension, how do I deal with this, right? That's actually something we want to learn to get comfortable with, because that dissonance, that tension that's being pulled up, I've often described it as like a bow and arrow, right? You need to have the flexible string, the feminine, as well as the masculine, grounded, immovable piece, so that you can have the momentum necessary to launch the arrow forward. And that's what we're looking to create, because if we were all in the same phase, the same stage, the same role at the same time, it's just like a blob that we're trying to pick up and move forward. And it becomes very difficult to try and do that. It takes a lot more energy, where this pattern actually creates natural momentum and propulsion forward that we want. So when we're looking at these roles, one of the things that happens is we have here there are some people who enter a divine departure basically because they recognize a dissonance between themselves and the church as an organization. And this is usually the most traumatizing experience. It's very direct and often traumatic, because you view the person who is inflicting this problem from phase 2, right? Inflicting this problem on you, it is causing suffering, it is hurting, it is very direct that is occurring. Other people go through a divine departure and it is triggered because of somebody else, right? So there's a shift in their relationship with a parent, with a spouse, with a sibling, with a friend, right? There's this other person, and that can create a little bit more of a buffer so that they can still kind of be like, I'm not quite sure about some of these things in the church as an organization as a whole, but they mainly identify that the main relationship that is struggling, that they're feeling the tension with, is between them and this other person. This third layer is people who don't necessarily have as much of another person or relationship that they feel like is threatened or having a problem. And they're not really viewing the church as the antagonist to something. They're more viewing that there's something natural that is happening in their life, and that this has some purpose, and that there's a reason for this tension here. And so you can see that depending upon how extreme that relationship is, how stretched it is, the amount of trauma that is usually experienced. People who very much view the church as the antagonizer in the disruption that's causing the energy clash, they experience the most amount of trauma. And they are typically people who have the most difficult time remaining in the church and needing some sort of safe refuge separate in order to process and heal. Now, again, these kind of 3 different roles here correspond well to the different phases. So oftentimes, if we're in this top role, and there's a reason why I called a role, so hang on, we'll get there. But if you're in this top one, this is usually because you're in some sort of phase 1, phase 2 experience, right? It's that suffering, it's that fear-based, it's external change needs to occur. It's very focused on action. And that's a natural place to be when you have been growing up in a system that is focused on helping people get from phase 1 to phase 2, right? Basically, this occurs when you get stuck in that cycle of phase 1, phase 2. It's very natural to happen. People who can instead move to this experience usually get into a phase 3 space, because they're viewing it more as like going internal. Did I do something to cause this problem in my relationship with this other person? Did they do something, right? It's that very introspective space, where this final one is more of a phase 4 view. It's recognizing, oh, there's purpose in this energy clash. There's a reason this is happening. It's not a bad thing. I can allow this to happen. And then that final space that you can be in is the unshifted self, right? You haven't gone on a divine departure yet. And you'll notice here, these top 3 ones are all in my blue that represents the feminine, and the gold here is representing the masculine. And so the masculine here is like that arrow, or the bow on the arrow. And here's the string that is going out and helping kind of stretch us back. And so the feminine divine departure that creates this energy clash between these 3 experiences and this experience actually has a role here, right? We need some of this extreme one because it is very direct. It's directly experienced, right? The church is directly affecting my life or people that I care about. But that creates this catalyzing energy to help propel and move us forward. People who are anchored more in this experience, they experience it like there's this little bit of a buffer, and it's like kind of looking over at the church there, you know, like what's going on. But I'm also a little bit more focused on some stuff that's happening in my own world here. And they're more of that bridge experience. There's maybe some trauma that is experienced, but not as much. And this third role is in practicing what it looks like to embrace this separation, this polarity that is created. And we kind of see this play out through some different generational patterns and experiences that different people identify with these different ones. And so they play this role here of catalyzing more awakening, more divine departures of other, building this bridge from the old energy to the new growth and expanded and experience we're working towards. And this last one of where we've been and we're practicing being okay with this transition state. And then we actually need some people who have not shifted yet, right? That is holding that masculine space. And so while it can be really frustrating, if you're in one of these spaces and you don't have an environment where you feel safe and where you feel trusted, that you can explore this experience and you can move through the feminine journey of going out and exploring and coming back and reestablishing your experience with the masculine, if you don't feel safe to do that, that's where you're going to have some level of trauma that's contributing to that experience. And that's the part that we can have control over, right? These don't have to be such traumatizing experiences. That's where community and sharing our stories and why past generations that had these more extreme experiences where it was like us versus the church. And this is where we got a lot of like excommunication occurring because it's us against the church, right? And that's kind of the foundation for excommunication is you're out of alignment with the church, right? But there's an understanding that there is a role in helping identify those things, but we need to help people understand how to do it in a way where it's not trauma. And we're like, you did all this horrible thing, right? And part of that is recognizing the organization part of the church is also run by people who are living in a fallen world, who have their own experiences and their own things to do, right? So anyways, there's these layers here. This is something that we can go into for another time, but I just wanted to kind of give that identity there to recognize that everyone, no matter where you are in your experience, has this role, and you're playing a pivotal part in helping create this polarity to help us move forward and catalyze things happening moving forward. Thoughts or questions on that?
So would you say like people getting offended by other members, more like that buffer? Like I'm fine with the church, or like I'm hurting from the church because of the member. Would that be there?
So that could be an experience that's going on, but it also has to do with, have they shifted yet? If they haven't shifted, they might just be like, I'm fine with the church and how it is right now. I'm in that stable point. I haven't moved yet into the next level of growth. And so I don't really understand why you have issues and why you're struggling and why you're talking about all of this. So that could be one area that it's coming up where like it's a member to a member, but it can also be somebody who has shifted and they've started moving, but they haven't recognized that they've started shifting yet. They're just starting to get curious and they're like, what is going on? Why are you doing this? What is happening? That is where it's more of a buffer experience that's happening.
Okay.
And they're trying to understand what's happening.
Okay.
Other thoughts or questions? Okay. So I didn't have time to practice this before I got on, so it's run a little bit longer than I intended, but I really want to leave you with this big picture story because this is one of the most powerful pieces to help recognize how all of this kind of comes together and why it's so important. One of my things growing up was I was always, I feel like as a youth, told about the church is the lifeboat and stay in the lifeboat, right? It's the safe space. This is where you want to be. And don't get out of the lifeboat. It's dangerous to get out of the lifeboat. And that's, I feel like, a lot of that masculine language. And part of this comes from because, again, the role of the church was we've got lots of people floating out at sea in phase one. They are lost, they are stuck, they are out there. And we need to bring them to these lifeboats to help keep them safe. But the restoration tells us the lifeboat isn't the end goal. We want to get back to land. Land is where we originally started. We moved somewhere else. We got lost at sea along the way. The church is now being restored. It's returning these lifeboats to help bring us to the land. And in order for us to find land, there are those of us who I believe are being pulled out of the lifeboat and being called to go find land first, right? Go find that phase 3, that phase 4 ultimate goal experience. And your journey to get there might be like, I cannot stand the people in my lifeboat. I would rather die at sea. I am jumping out, right? Here I go. I don't care what's out there. I'll find something, right? Sometimes that is more of our experience. Other times it's kind of like a tiptoe and 1 foot out and we're back in the boat and 1 foot out and we're back in the boat. And we're like, am I going over the edge? I don't know. Something keeps telling me I need to jump out of the lifeboat, but this feels like it's going against everything I've been taught and told, which is stay in the lifeboat. And what we don't know is God has right there, a dolphin for you to hop on that's ready to take you over to a sea turtle who is going to take you to a guy who's got a tugboat. And then you're going to find this surfer with his surfboard and all of these like other vehicles to help get you to land. And oftentimes, once the feminine reaches that new beautiful vista or finds land, it's like, this is so amazing. Why would I ever want to go back to the lifeboat? Right? It's like, this is so much better. Can I please just like stay here? And we're standing on land, like, come over here. I found land, and there's fresh water and beautiful fruits. And it's like a tropical paradise. Come this way, right? This is where we want, right? And what is starting to happen is God is actually calling people who have found land and saying, I need you to go back to the lifeboat. And every fiber in your being is going to be sitting there going, crap, I have to go back to the lifeboat. How do I manage this? I don't know how to take what I have experienced and learned while I've been over here on land. How do I bring it to these people who are in the lifeboat, who have never tasted it, who have never experienced it, who don't know what I'm talking about, who think I'm crazy and hallucinating about this magical land that is so wonderful, right? How am I supposed to go back to them, right? But this is a new depth of relationship. This is what the feminine rise is all about. It is saying, okay, God, I know I don't have to go back, right? The goal is all of human life is in this ocean and we're all making it to land, right? We have lots of different vehicles. There is the Catholic Church with its massive aircraft hangar that it's like carrying a whole bunch of people towards the land. And you've got, lots of other religions and practices and things that are helping point us all back there, right? We know the millennium occurs. We know all the world reaches that experience. And we know that missionary work continues in the millennium. So why would missionary work continue in the millennium if we're all supposed to be on the same boat or the same ship? To me, the message is we're not, right? That you don't have to be in the church in order to make it to the land. It doesn't matter where you are, you're going to make it to the land. This happens, right? What matters is, what is the experience you want to do? What is the purpose that you feel called to? Where is the direction and the relationship that you want to be in? And basically, Joseph Smith built a cruise ship and was saying, this is the restored ship for those who want to enter into a deeper, different kind of relationship with God. And your purpose is not just about helping people find the land and get there, but you're going to go out and you're going to build your own ships and your own boats, and you're going to go out and you're going to gather people who are lost at sea and bring them with you and help bring them home. And missionary work is basically saying, do you want to be a part of this cause, right? There's our work and there is God's work. God's work is, this is my work and my glory, to bring to pass the immortality and eternal life of man. Immortality, to me, meaning bringing us into wholeness with ourselves. Our spirit and body are in perfect union together. And then eternal life being God's life or God's purpose, meaning we are about God's work and basically saying, I'm on call for you, God. Right? If there is a need that is met, if there's a person that needs help, if there's a way that you want me to show up, that you need someone driving this boat out there, you can call on me. That's why I'm a part of this church. That's why I'm in this type of relationship for you. It's not about working out my own salvation. It's about, I want to partner with you because your whole purpose and goal is to get everybody to the land. And you are going to work with everybody, right? Nobody gets left out or lost at sea. Everybody gets brought in. That's part of their work, but we get to partner with them, right? And a piece of how I feel so strongly that the women of the church right now have this beautiful opportunity is to step in and show and describe, what does risen feminine energy look like? How do we get into those higher phases? How do we live our lives from those states of beings? How do we operate in this phase 4? How do we learn to communicate with the masculine and bring them along in this journey and help them discover the land that we found? And to that end is everything that I do. That's what I'm passionate about, is helping other people understand this process, understand what role do I want to be a part of, right? And sometimes that journey, this is a piece where it's like, I don't know what God's plan is for you, right? I'm just helping people sign up. And then God is like, okay, you're going to go over here and you're going to do this. And I need you to go find the weird guy from the islands in the middle of nowhere who's got a little raft. He's going to take you out over there, right? You may have this beautiful, magical journey all on your own. But there are people, especially women right now, who are trying to navigate, I have this family, I have these responsibilities, these things that matter to me that I know are important. I want to be here having a relationship with my kids, raising them, teaching them. But I also feel this pull of like, there is something more I'm supposed to be doing out in the world. And I don't know how to balance those two things. And I don't know how to do that work. I feel split. I'm stuck in some of these different phases, in some of these different roles. I don't know how to navigate my own way, let alone try and drive a tugboat and go find other people and help bring them. But there's something inside of me that won't let me stop and settle, and I need to move it forward. And that, my friends, is what this program is all about. So if there are those of you who are sitting here going, ah, crap, God is calling me back out to the lifeboat, this is your resource, okay? This is your map to help you learn how to do that, how to not get lost at sea, how to not get triggered along the way, right? The first piece of it is focusing on learning new language, right? We want to understand, what is this model? What are these phases? How do we communicate that well? The second phase is learning self-regulation and healing so that you can navigate your triggers and your wounds like a pro. And then the final step is stepping into your purpose and power, finding what is my identity? What is it that I'm meant to be doing? How do I know that? How do I enter into this deeper relationship with God where I'm saying, great, wherever you need me to go, let's do this. I'm ready for it. And having it be a positive experience instead of one where it's like, I don't know, is that me? Is that God? I don't know, maybe I should put it out there. Maybe I won't. Yes, I need to. I'm going to. It's amazing. It's wonderful. Why wouldn't I? Right? We have kind of that conversation. I want to help you get in touch with your intuition so that you can really trust that. Right? So this month one, we're focusing on the staircase model. You'll get the language, understand where others are coming from, know how to talk and connect in ways that they can understand, right? Speak their language, masculine or feminine, different phases. You know where they are. You know how to identify it. You know what language will connect with them. Month two is learning how to self-regulate, right? What are your wounds? What are your triggers? How do you get knocked off balance? How do you find that alignment? And how do you practice doing it regularly? And then how do you help others do it? Whether that's your kids, whether it's people in your ward, your own women's, your neighbors, your friends, your clients, right? There's somebody out there who wants to learn this skill and that you can help them do it. Month three then is all about stepping into that truth, right? How do you trust yourself? How do you learn to lean into your intuition? How do you develop that deeper relationship with God? And we're going to practice this firsthand with other women. So you get to be like a prototype, a mini practice run of trying to figure out what Zion looks like, right? How do we all step into our roles? How do we help each other? How do we share our insights? How do we support one another? How are we there for each other? You practice bringing your whole self that you learned how to find in phase two, based off of the language you found in month one, and carry that with you at all times. And to help you be able to do this, there's also going to be group support through Marco Polo or Voxer, where you get to have this community, you get that safe place, you get to practice embodying it. There's also going to be one-on-one support in our weekly meetings where I will live coach you and teach you. You can ask your questions, get direct feedback on what happened during the week, as well as I'm going to be providing you templates and scripts, and so that you have ways to start practicing using this stuff in your everyday life. But because I know one of the most difficult things can be those dear sweet men in our lives who just don't quite understand what we're going through, right? One of the bonuses that I'm throwing is the spouse support program. So that first month, you both get to go through the staircase model and learning the new language, but you get to learn it from your perspective, from the masculine or the feminine. And the reason for this is it can be so amazing as you're learning these concepts and it's like, this is so great. This is so wonderful. How do I communicate it to my husband? And you go to try and teach it. And usually we present the words and language that connect with us, which is the feminine, which does not resonate and connect with them. They need to be taught it from the masculine. And so I'm going to take that role on for you. It's going to be a group that will be held most likely it'll be on Saturdays for about an hour, where they can come get familiar with the staircase model, learn the same language, so that you guys can start talking with each other and be like, okay, we're in the middle of an energy clash. We need to calm down for a minute. Or, hey, I need you to flip. Or, right, you start having this new language to describe the process that you're going through. And what that language does is it helps you reestablish trust, and that you're in the relationship, that things aren't falling apart, that you're still in this pattern together. There's a new level of understanding. So this, I think, is going to be a really valuable resource to have as well. Again, it's just for that first month, though. The remaining 2 months will just be focused on the women. Here's a couple of testimonials from other women who have gone through these experiences and what it's been like. Cami was saying, working with Emily has been transformative. Her insights were amazing. When I came across Emily's account, I was at one of the most difficult times in my life. I felt guided to her and her work. It was a stretch for me financially, but what I have gained was priceless. Something that I love about Emily is she offers practical models that you will use again and again in your life. Many coaches make big promises, but Emily delivers. Her content is extremely valuable and she's completely dedicated to your success. Through Emily's content, I felt my abilities heighten. I'm now living in the flow of my life rather than fighting against every aspect of it. I have been able to let go of my black and white way of thinking, allow for renewance in my life. She's helped me immensely in my relationships, both with people and organizations. She's shown me that my experiences are not only normal, they're a necessary part of my growth. She inspires me not only by what she teaches, but by how she lives her life. Most of all, she's taught me that I can trust my inner knowing, and she's helped me reclaim myself. Cannot recommend her enough. Mary said, working with Emily has changed me for the better in countless ways. I don't think I had any concept of the actual sea of change that would take place. It's been an incredible investment. It's the best investment you could make in yourself and will bring returns to you 100-fold. I'm kind of going a little fast because I do want to share these with you, but I also hear a baby who is just dying and needing a mom. So I want to wrap things up for you. I know it's getting late as well, but there's been some really valuable things for a lot of these women, right? Straight up changed my life, powered through my limiting beliefs, launched into principles and strategies that I use every day. I really believe that we as women are being called to step up and understand this role, to be willing to help become a part of this journey and bringing all of the boats home. If this is speaking to you, if you're like, yes, this is what I need, this is what I'm feeling pulled towards, I need to do this, there is an application on my website. You can find it in the link on my Instagram or visit emilycarolynbaker.com. The application will walk you through some questions. It's fairly detailed. The purpose is mainly for me to just understand where you are and if I feel like it would really be a good fit for you and a benefit. If you're wanting to talk with me and ask me questions directly or more about it, there will be a space at the end where you can schedule a time to chat with me, or you can book a call with me just directly from my Instagram link. Both of those are great resources. This is going to be a powerful group. And it's important to note that it's not just about you and the change that's going to happen for yourself and your family. It is also about the other women who are in that group. I'm a firm believer that the people who are in these groups are meant to be in that group because of the interactions and the relationships. You will have stories, you will have comments, you will have experiences and thoughts and ideas that these other women need. It's not just about you. It's about somebody might be waiting for you to join that program. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me a DM. Hopefully this has been really helpful for you. The replay will be coming out in a couple of days. It usually takes me a few to process it and get it uploaded and sent out. It will also have that resource guide for you that's got all the different words in it. If there's other concepts or ideas that you're wanting more insight or understanding on, my DMs are always open. I can talk about this all day long, so don't feel shy. Feel free to reach out. And again, if this program is speaking to you, I would love to have you. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the evening and talk to you all later.